want to introduce you to this concept of mindful spending. So mindful spending essentially is when you have a really good grasp on what it is that you're spending, but why you're spending it, and if it's spending it for the right reasons, or if you're buying something for the right reasons. So we're here to explore and dig deeper into that and provide you some framework and some practical tools to support you. At the end of the day, gifting is a love language. So naturally, we're going to show our love through gifting. Yet, it doesn't have to be at the expense of our future goals, of our new year identity, the things we want to show up for. And it's very important to now put these things in check. So I have a few tips that I want to walk you through. The first one is creating a wait list. A lot of our decisions around spending happens in the moment, and there's so many temptations out there. Not only are the ads just becoming better and even more submerged with our subconscious, but access to our finances has never been easy. It's literally on our phones right now. I don't even know where my wallet is anymore. Access to our finances has become so easily accessible on our phones and things like that. So it's important to start creating strategies to help us with that. And having a wait list, for example, is a really helpful tool, especially if you're online shopping. I put things in like the cart and visit it a few days later, which is very important here because you're creating a gap between the impulse and the action. And that gap helps you then reflect on, is this really something I want? Is this really something I need? And am I buying it for the right reasons?
That's such a good idea. I should really start doing that because I'm definitely not. And I do find that even sometimes things arrive and I didn't even remember that I got that. So it is an interesting part of our culture right now, I think especially with the advertising on social media, because it's curated, the algorithm's curated exactly to what your likes and dislikes are. So it almost feels like it knows you better than you know yourself.
And clutter not only has a weight in your bank account, but it also literally impacts how you show up and the emotions you experience on a day-to-day. So the other tip I have is understanding your spending triggers. That is a really key point because now you're going to start recognizing patterns. Patterns show up in the way where there's how it shows up in the body, so the somatic experience, the emotion, the thought, and the behavior. So once we start bringing awareness to that pattern, we can then create pattern interrupts to help lead us to healthier behaviors. But understanding triggers could be understanding, for example, when grief shows up and then we want to mask that with a trip to the ice cream shop, or sometimes lack of self-worth, and now we want to just buy extra outfits, or whatever the case may be. We all have different kryptonites, be it clothes, be it food, be it going out. There's different ways in how it shows up in our body and our experience, but it's important to understand what our patterns are. For the longest time for me, it was food. I would literally binge in ways that are very unsupportive, and I would also be very aware that now I'm eating my emotions, but I wasted so much money on that now just having awareness of it helps me understand the triggers that lead me to this not only mindless shopping, but also mindless eating.
Yeah, I felt like I experienced it when I had body image issues. So if I felt like I put on some weight, I would find myself shopping more, trying to like shop my way out of not feeling worthy or good enough. So like trying to buy a new blouse because that somehow drew attention away to the pounds that I had or whatever. It's really interesting to kind of start to do that. So what are some of the other things that people can do to incorporate this idea of mindful spending?
I really love the idea of tracking your spending, and there's could be different ways in how you do it. You could track your spending in general over the course of a month, and there's so many ways where you can do it manually, or you can create an app that helps you categorize where your spending is going. But one thing I also particularly like to do is pick a specific thing you want to track. It feels more doable to do that versus tracking your spending in general, specifically because you're trying to bring light into that particular habit that you're now trying to transform into something better. I prefer giving you digestible things that you can start incorporating versus feeling overwhelmed, but it's going to be life transformative when you bring data into this conversation, because data is also going to support you understanding the repercussions that these habits are having on your life. And that will maybe drive change in a much better way than
that feels so much more manageable. Just to think about doing one of them, because that is always the piece that happens to me. I get so overwhelmed with all of it that I just end up doing none of it. So I like picking the one thing. I need to look and actually see and calculate what is going there and try and change that habit. And again, one of the interesting things that you said, Aseel, when we look at that data, when we look at where you're actually spending money, you can see what are you valuing right now. So if it's all about going out with friends and eating, okay, you value friendship. Is there another way that you could spend which is a little bit more mindful but still values friendship?
Model by example. Think about the ways that you can start minimizing consumerism in your own life, but also inviting others around you to join you on that particular path.
I love it. So new economy.
Yes.
And that's exactly what we want to do here.
Another important tool when it comes to this conversation is infusing our values with what we buy. And there's different names to specifically refer to this tool. Value-based budgeting or value-based accounting is one of them. I learned it from Barry Tesler, who created The Art of Money. And it was really interesting because it gives you power in renaming some of the categories on a regular budget sheet, transforming it into something that is more infused and aligned with your values, which in turn also makes you feel like it's a more personal thing, because money sometimes is just boring, looking at this dull sheet of mortgage and rent and groceries versus names that represent something you're excited about, like my nourishment, my sacred space, my education and my investment in myself, versus like student loan, for example. But the other piece of it is also doing like a value inventory. What that means is looking at the values that mean a lot to you in your life and making sure that whatever money you're spending reflects these values. So for example, I value relationships, health, family, fun and creativity, adventure. So when I look at my expense sheet, these values should be easily represented in the items that I'm now expressing outwardly in the world. If your cash flow or your expense sheet doesn't tell me who you are, then there's a mismatch between your values and how you're spending your money.
100%. I think it's interesting though to really see, we all have ideas of what we think we value, and then we can see where our spending is actually showing us what we're valuing with the, vote of our dollar essentially. So for me, I often see places where I'm still not in full alignment and I feel a little bit of guilt around that. So one of those places is around my desire to be connected to the earth and really environmentalism and climate change. So again, it's being able to really see, hey, maybe I'm not fully aligned yet. That's okay. Don't shame yourself over it. Bringing the awareness to it, being mindful of it is the first step if we want to create behavior change.
Actually, on that note, it's really important that you designate a guilt-free spending. Be it an account, be it maybe a gift card that you give yourself at the beginning of every month that allows you and gives you the availability to spend freely. A lot of what we're doing when it comes to our relationship with mindful spending and mindful relationship with money overall is having trust in that flow of money. Trusting that whatever we're putting out there also comes back in our life and creating that ease and comfort in that currency flowing back and forth. So mindful spending is not about creating restrictions and starting to bring anxiety and stress into the concept of spending, of worrying about not having enough for the future. That's not at all what it is. If you're now feeling constrained in the concept of mindful spending, then you're doing it wrong. It's actually bringing joy, abundance. Like I think about expansiveness, even having like an open arms expression when I think about mindful spending, because it's really putting and trusting the energy I'm putting out there and trusting that it's gonna come back to me tenfold, but really feeling good and aligned with what it is I'm choosing this energy to go towards.
I love that, and I think that again, really recognizing that when we don't do this, there are these subtle feelings of shame and dissonance that we internalize, that we metabolize, that end up making us actually do the, mindless behavior more and more. Readdress, renegotiate within ourselves.
And we're doing this as a community, so we're very grateful that you, again, tuned into this module brought some awareness to these themes and see how it internalizes for you, how it shows up for you, and most importantly, what can you do about it? So nervous system regulation is about understanding the triggers that we receive from the world and understanding how we process them internally in a way that doesn't send us to a flight or fight response. Because a lot of the times we are just reacting to life. And reacting to life means there's no space between what we perceive and how we behave. And that means we're constantly operating from space of trauma. And that actually takes us out from the present moment back into the time where this trauma took place. So that's why a lot of the times we are acting from a childish space, from an overreactive space, or sometimes the opposite, underreactive, where we're completely deassociating with the events that are taking place around us.
100%.
And regardless which aspect and how it shows up for us, it's all out of the present moment, which really is what we're trying to address here.
And there's so many things that can dysregulate our nervous system, but I can promise you that money is probably one of the number
100%.
one. So for myself, I'll give you an example. So as a business owner, I have had the experience where I've had to deal with, cash flow issues or an economic downturn, and all of a sudden seeing the bank account start to go down, down, down. So now if I see that, my body will have an automatic response. Oh my gosh, is this going to be the same as before? What am I going to do? Even if it's not that, even if it's literally not coming from the same issue. So it's really interesting to start to actually see how our nervous system feels when we're regulated, when we feel good, and when we are dysregulated. How does it show up? For me, usually mine will show up in the form of either exhaustion. I feel just completely fatigued, like I can't look at that anymore, I can't talk about it, or I feel an anxiousness, like I guess that is the fight or flight response.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For me, it's anxiousness as well. I notice it the most in the way I breathe. I start breathing shallow. I start breathing in a way that almost feels like I'm not taking oxygen in. And that sets me even further. It's a vicious cycle that sets me even further into more anxiety, because now it's like, am I dying? What's happening in my body? So it's important to understand how does a dysregulated nervous system show up for you, and also understand some of the triggers around it. But what's really important here, I'm gonna make the audacious claim that regulating your nervous system helps you in saving money and making more money. So let's explore a little bit why that is. Think about when you're not regulated. So that's when you're experiencing all the discomfortable emotions that we're talking about: stress, anxiety, grief, sadness, anger, whatever emotions naturally show up in your life. Oftentimes there are patterns that show up more frequently than others. Our emotional imprints start in the first 7 years of our life. It's really important that we understand that, because now I have a son, I'm a new mother. Our kids start communicating with emotions. That's why we hear about the terrible twos, the tantrums. Emotions are the leading language that we start really interacting with the world through, especially in the beginning of the 7 years of our life. So naturally, whatever emotional imprints happen in these times, they become a big integral part of our life. They become a way in which we perceive this world, and we also become addicted to these emotions. Because these emotions don't happen in isolation. There's literally chemical neurotransmitters that go through our body that are actually a way in which these emotions show up. And that's why these patterns become addicting, because there's also chemical things that are released in our brain, from the way our hormones operate, to the way our brain is wired, to the way these emotions now impact literally the fullness of our body experience, and somatically how we notice some of these things happening. And that's why we become addicted to certain emotions in our life. So it's important to now understand, okay, when I'm addicted to this pattern, how is it now showing up, not just in what I feel, but how I think and how I behave. And that's why regulating your nervous system is important, because once you understand how to have a grasp on these emotions, now we can start rewiring them and changing the way it's impacting your outcomes and your behaviors.
So what's a practical example? I know you've taught about the polyvagal theory before. How does it really work? How do we end up figuring out a way to actually manage if I feel myself in a dysregulated state? What are some of the tips or tools that I can use to regulate?
Breath is essentially our connection with the present moment. And when we're able to tune into our breath and really become aware of something called consciously connected breath, then we start really anchoring in the present moment. Because when we're not regulated, we're usually acting from a space of the past or the future, and our breath can bring us back into the moment right here, right now.
One of the things I think just personally for me in terms of regulating my nervous system, well, first let's talk about how you notice your nervous system is dysregulated. One of the ways for me, because we're so trained in chronic stress at this point, that we don't really realize that we're even in a state of overwhelm because it's just our normal.
We've normalized
it, and we've also normalized it in the way that we work. Like, everyone's stressed. You see people driving home, from work, and the traffic, and at the grocery store during the weekday, and picking up the kids, and all of the many, many things that we all juggle. We are in a constant state of nervous system dysregulation, and we've normalized that.
So remember at the beginning of the video when I said I'm gonna make the audacious claim that calming down your nervous system helps you save money? This is exactly what I'm talking about, because when we're not regulated, we are engaged in these activities that numb this discomfort in the emotions that come up, be it the way we eat, the way we binge, the way we drink, the way we just go after all these behaviors, which involves spending a lot of money. That's why calming our nervous system brings us back into the present moment, creates this harmony, this regulation in our body, which then we wouldn't have the impulse to go and chase after these behaviors that drain our bank account along with our energy.
Yeah. I would say that for me, the fastest ways for me to regulate my nervous system, so Aseel talked quite a bit about breath, and we understand calming the breath or even just watching the breath. The other is nature. If you just go, even if you have a park by your house or a tree, and just go, if you can, take your shoes off and put your feet in the ground, even just doing that for a few minutes, you literally will change your entire physiology. From that. The last one is water.
Absolutely.
If you can go into a shower, a hot bath, even just run your hands underwater if that's all that's available to you, that
even
will
drinking water.
And drinking water,
yes.
Or looking at water, or the sound of water. So all of these things can actually help so much. Wherever you are on that scale, wherever your nervous system feels right now, there are little tiny things that you can do every single day to start building more space and more resilience within your body.
The last thing I'll mention is the other part of the claim that regulating your nervous system also supports you in making more money. And that's because when our system is harmonious, the blood flows properly back into the prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, it sits in the front of our brain, and it's the logical executive functioning part of how our brain works. And that brings reasoning into our life, which then supports the decisions we need to make in our business and our work, which effectively creates a more productive work, better decision making, more strategic, forward-thinking approach to life versus a response and a reaction out of trauma. And that's why regulating our nervous system supports us in also making more money.